Chapter 10. The Blanks. The evening had settled into a rhythm that Red should have found comforting, but instead it gnawed at her like an itch she couldn't scratch. Anna's laughter, bright and unrelenting, filled the small house with warmth, but Red couldn't shake the cold knot of anxiety twisting inside her. Every time Thomas spoke, every time he moved, she saw it. The blanks. He'd called them that, but no one could explain them. Not the doctors, not anyone. Just blanks. Moments when Thomas was there in body, but nowhere to be found in spirit. She'd seen it before. The way his eyes would glaze over, the way his hands would freeze in place as though he wasn't quite connected to the world. The doctors had given him clean bills of health, each one insisting his mind and body were fine. But Red knew better than that. Something was slipping through the cracks, and she was afraid it might be him. She looked over at Anna, her energetic tornado of a daughter, who had already decided it was time for her to take control of the evening. Anna's wild red curls bounced as she darted between the living room and the kitchen, demanding cartoons and attention, never pausing for more than a second before leaping into the next adventure. Red, despite the weight of her worry, couldn't help but smile at her daughter. Anna was a firecracker, just like her mother. She was the kind of kid who lived in the moment, demanding the world bend to her will, but also showing a tenderness that came from somewhere deeper. A heart that needed both love and boundaries, which Red, despite her own chaotic thoughts, was more than willing to provide. "Mommy!" Anna called, her little voice like a bell. "Hurry up! I want the remote! I want to watch my cartoons!" Red chuckled, brushing a loose lock of hair behind her ear. She had her hands full, but at least Anna had the energy to keep her distracted. "Dinner first, sweetheart," she said firmly, setting down the plate of lasagna with a soft clink. "Then cartoons. You know the rules." Anna's face scrunched up in that adorable way that always made Red's heart ache with love and frustration. "But Mom, I want cartoons now." Red's lips twitched into a smile despite herself. "Well, you're going to have to wait, Missy," she said, her tone teasing but firm. "Eat your dinner. I'll get you your remote when you finish." Anna's pout was comical, her lip jutting out dramatically as she stormed off to the couch. "Fine," she grumbled, sitting with exaggerated care as if to prove her displeasure. "But I want cartoons now after dinner." Red turned back to the stove, but a knot of worry tightened in her chest. She couldn't shake the image of Thomas standing in the kitchen earlier, his face distant, his movements slow as if something had taken root inside him and was slowly pulling him away from her, from Anna, from everything they'd built together. They'd been through so much, his childhood in the Hollar, the terror of that night in the woods, and the years since, filled with ups and downs. But this was different. There was something in his eyes, something in the way he carried himself now that sent a chill through her. The worry in her gut deepened. She couldn't lose him, not like this, not now. The sound of the bathroom door creaked open, breaking her thoughts, and Thomas stepped into the kitchen. Steam from his shower curled around him, but his presence didn't feel like the comforting warmth it once did. He looked off. There was a hollowness in his posture, a vacancy behind his eyes that Red hadn't seen before. His movements were stiff, robotic, like someone who was simply going through the motions. She noticed his clothes were still damp from the shower, his hair still slicked back as if he hadn't finished the process of fully re-entering the world. Anna, ever the eager one, shot up from the couch at the sight of her father, her face lighting up with joy. "Daddy!" she shrieked, rushing to him with all the urgency of a child whose entire universe revolved around her father's arms. She threw herself into him, her small hands gripping his shoulders as she beamed up at him. "Pick me up, Daddy! Pick me up!" Thomas hesitated. The briefest flicker of something crossing his face, something that looked like confusion, something Red didn't like at all. But then he leaned down and scooped Anna into his arms with a sigh, as if the weight of her was both a relief and a burden. He held her tightly, his chest pressing against hers in a way that should have felt comforting, but it didn't. He looked at Anna, but his eyes were unfocused, lost in a space Red couldn't reach. It was as though he wasn't fully there. Red felt a sharp pain in her chest, the familiar ache of love mingled with fear. Anna, oblivious to her father's distance, wriggled in his arms and wrinkled her nose, her face scrunching in exaggerated distaste. "Daddy, you stink," she proclaimed, her tiny voice full of the type of authority only a child could wield. "Go get a shower. Now, mister." Thomas blinked as though he had just returned to himself for a brief moment. Then, slowly, he smiled at her, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "All right, kiddo," he murmured, his voice hoarse as though it took an immense effort to speak. Anna pulled away from him and began stomping toward the hallway, her hands planted firmly on her hips. "Hurry up, Daddy," she commanded, her little legs moving faster than her body could keep up. "I want cuddles and cartoons. Hurry up." Thomas gave her a small nod, his movements slow, deliberate. He looked over his shoulder at Red, a fleeting, unsure expression on his face before he turned and disappeared down the hall. Red's heart clenched as she watched him go. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know what was happening to him, but she could feel the gap widening between them. There was a part of her, small but persistent, that feared she was losing him, and with it, the life they had built together. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on Anna, whose voice was now a blur of demands and questions as she plopped herself back down in front of the TV. Red tried to ignore the way her heart was pounding, tried to concentrate on the small, beautiful things in life that had always kept her grounded. But it was hard. So damn hard. Every time Thomas slipped into one of his blanks, it felt like she was slipping too. Then it happened. The silence stretched on longer than usual. The shower had been running for a while, but the sound of the water stopped abruptly, and a cold shiver ran down Red's spine. The house felt too still, too quiet. She stood up quickly, her breath hitching in her chest. She walked toward the hallway, her footsteps tentative. As she reached the bathroom door, she knocked lightly, calling out, "Thomas, you all right in there?" No answer. Red's stomach turned as she pushed the door open, her heart pounding against her ribcage. There he was, standing under the stream of water, unmoving. His eyes were wide, unfocused, staring at nothing. The water cascaded over his shoulders, but he didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to feel it. "Thomas!" Red's voice cracked, the panic rising in her throat. She reached for him, her hands trembling as she touched his arm, the flesh cold under her fingertips. He didn't move, didn't even acknowledge her. "Thomas," she repeated, more urgently now, shaking his arm, pulling him toward her. The fear gripped her, tight and suffocating. "Thomas, where are you?" A chill filled the bathroom, colder than the water running over his skin, colder than anything she had ever felt before. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the smell hit her. Pine. Cedar. The smell of the woods from his childhood, the woods he hadn't visited in years. Her breath caught. This wasn't right. None of this was right. Thomas blinked, his gaze snapping to hers with such intensity it almost startled her. And then he whispered so quietly, it barely registered in her ears, "Something's wrong, Red." Tears welled up in her eyes as she clutched him to her, pressing him close, wishing she could protect him from whatever this was. But as she held him, the reality hit her with crushing force. She didn't know what was happening. She couldn't save him from the thing that was already taking him away. And the terrifying part was that she didn't even know what that thing was. She held him tighter, afraid that the next time he slipped away, he might not come back at all.